Just want to note that the Inspector General has said that it is not possible to rule out political bias in the FBI's 17 Carter page FISA errors. They asked, can you say it wasn't because of political bias? And then the answer was, I do not know. So they don't know. You know why? Because how do they explain somebody doctoring information to look worse for Carter Page and therefore continue the FISA against the Trump campaign and risk criminal prosecution? Friends, this is a big deal. You can't do that. I remember a long time ago, a guy in the NYPD, I think it's turned into a scandal. He used a warrant for phone records for either his wife or his ex-girlfriend or something, to see if she was seeing somebody, whatever. That guy got in a lot of trouble. I think he ended up not only getting fired, I think he lost his pension too, and just barely escaped prison, if memory serves. It was a big deal. And that was just for getting some phone records of somebody that he, not that was okay, but wasn't a presidential campaign. This is a big deal. They can't explain. Oh, we have no explanations. We're all supposed to act like we're as dumb as the FBI is pretending that the people involved in this were. Oh, we don't know. It's a presidential campaign. Yeah, you get a little sloppy sometimes. Things happen a little bit. Oh, who cares? Stunning stuff that we see. But like I said, it is not over, thankfully. Just a little more that I wanted to get to here on what you need. Because what you're being told about this today is a lie. What the media is presenting to you is not true. Lindsey Graham, I will say, has done a fantastic job today so far. My friend Molly Hemingway over at The Federalist has this. Graham begins by noting that if you think takeaway of a report was something about its predication, it's proof you did not read the report. Says his goal is to educate people about the actual contents of the report and how it was spun by implicated parties. He says he'll assume for the sake of argument that the investigation started fine. Notes that there are essentially no standards for opening a counterintelligence probe. Discussing the violations of rule of law, systemic failure, people at the highest level of government took law into their own hands. It's as if J. Edgar Hoover came back to life, the old FBI that had a chip on its shoulder and wanted to intimidate people. Lindsey Graham read texts from probe officials like Strzok and Page, showing extreme partisan bias against Trump. God, Trump is a loathsome human, Strzok wrote. Oh my God, he's an idiot. These are the people involved in this probe. No political bias? But remember, the Inspector General report, I told you this before on Hillary Clinton's email, said, yeah, there was some stuff here and there that wasn't handled appropriately, but no political bias. Well, if you look at the decisions, it seems that there's quite a lot of bias. And if you look at their communications leading up to those decisions, there's quite a lot of bias. Graham's explaining how FBI blatantly doctored evidence and failed to mention exonerating evidence in order to use, in order to secure a warrant to spy on an innocent U.S. citizen. Notes that the manipulation of evidence changed Carter Page's help to his country to the opposite. Notes that attorney who doctored that evidence in order to violate Carter Page's civil liberties also happened to have extreme partisan bias against Trump. Graham notes that newsrooms in America share this extreme bias. The FBI guy who doctored evidence texted Viva la Resistance, if you are wondering whether or not he's a part of the resistance. Yeah, they're lying to you. There's bias all over the place here. Couldn't be any more obvious, couldn't be any more clear. But they don't have smoking gun evidence of bias. But that's asking a lot, isn't it? Haven't we been told all along in the Trump impeachment fiasco, which we'll get to in just a moment, haven't we been told all along that, you don't need to even be a firsthand source of something, right? You can just hear something from somebody else. Hearsay is better than firsthand evidence. They actually had people say that in Congress. It's better than firsthand evidence. But now, oh no, all the rules change very quickly. Unless you have somebody who writes a confession about their political bias, you can't actually think that they did anything wrong. You can't think that maybe just based upon the decisions they make and what they've shared about the way they view the world, about the way they view the president specifically and the election, that maybe they would have done things a bit differently. My friends, it is very damaging to the FBI that this has been allowed to occur, and I have to tell you, it is a whitewash. You cannot trust the FBI anymore on a politically sensitive investigation unless there is a house cleaning. And by the way, FBI Director Wray should go. He's an institutionalist. I'm not saying he's a anti-Trump zealot. He's an institutionalist. I've told you about this. I've broken this down. People who have worked for these places for decades think that they are, in fact, more important than the elected leaders who oversee them, that their judgment matters more, that they're the true professionals, and that there's also a built-in need to protect this edifice of government execution, even in the face of tremendous malfeasance. So, this is where we are. They're not going to reform willingly on their own. There has to be a lot more. By the way, Lindsey Graham also asked, is it spying of the Inspector General if the FISA court now reviews all this information and sees that there were omissions, there were errors, there were lies told to get that FISA on Carter Page, and that the dossier was a central and necessary part of it, which was a huge lie the media told for a very long time. Oh, no, the dossier wasn't a big thing. The dossier wasn't a part of it. Thank heavens for some of my conservative media friends who are just running around just rhetorically throat-punching some of these lib journos on Twitter for the lies that they told in 2017 and 2018. Oh, the dossier is not a big part of this. There's super secret sources you don't know about. That's what they used to say. Just to keep the narrative, keep the lies alive as long as you can. Let them do as much damage. Let them slow down the Trump presidency as much as possible. Perhaps you'll get more people like Roger Stone indicted for process crimes. Send in a bunch of federal agents to kick in his door in the middle of the night with automatic weapons pointed at his head while he's standing there in his silk pajamas having a martini. Is it spying, Senator Graham asks. It's illegal surveillance, Inspector General Horowitz responded. My friends, that's also called spying. Surveillance is a fancy French word for spying. It can be legal or illegal depending on the circumstances. If you lie intentionally to spy on somebody, that's a problem. If you lie to create the predicate for surveillance, then you are in fact engaged in spying. They did spy on a presidential campaign. They were trying to take them down. And keep in mind, the mere fact that they had this FISA open, the mere fact that Papadopoulos was being looked at in Crossfire Hurricane, that story of Russia collusion was used as a weapon itself against Trump. So they used lies, and in some cases intentional lies, to create investigations and then reported on those investigations to convince the American people that President Trump was a traitor. That is what happened here. And there are people who have been covering this, running around with this story, throwing gasoline on the fire of this story for years. None of them yet. I have not seen a single person say, I was wrong. I'm sorry. Not one. How is that possible? Have you heard James Comey say that he's sorry, that he was wrong? He had full confidence. Everything was fine with the FISA. I'm sure now he'd do one of his, Socratic Comey on the one hand and on the other. And, some people say this about me, and I would never say anything bad about them, except those people deserve to be locked up in prison forever. And, Comey is an absolute disgrace. And by the way, people in the FBI, including like Pajama Boy over at CNN, who's former FBI, and Asha Rangappa, who's probably the worst national security analyst on. I don't know. It's between her and this woman Juliet Kayyem are the two dumbest national security analysts on TV, I think, or at least at CNN. I mean, I'm sure there's some at MSNBC. Oh no, Malcolm Nance is also really wrong a lot at MSNBC. Man, this would be a fun game. The dumbest national security analyst on TV. I mean, I'd go down a list. There's a whole bunch of them. I can't remember. They had a couple of a couple of one-star generals that used to go on CNN who are also just I think Hertling was one. I mean, he might have been a 3-star or 4. I don't even know. Guy's an idiot. So they really find the worst of the worst. It's amazing. They do a really good job of that. It's almost like the movie Major League, where they're trying to create the worst baseball team to have the most losses so they can relocate the team. That's how CNN picks its national security analysts. Let's get the people that are wrong the most, that know the least, or that are the most compromised, the most unethical. That's where you get the McCabe's and the Brennans and the Clappers and those guys. These are people who were running the national security apparatus under Obama. And gee, I guess it's such a shock that every single foreign policy challenge the Obama administration touched was a disaster, and how the Islamic State took over enough territory to control the lives of about 4 or 5 million people at one point. We're getting hit with major terrorist attacks every couple of months, either here or in Europe, mass casualty attacks inspired by or directed by the Islamic State. It's almost like the people that were running things under Obama had no idea what the heck they were doing. But back for a moment to this situation that we see unfolding here, where everyone's spinning and spinning and spinning and trying to evade accountability for what they did here with the Russia collusion story. Just remember this, my fellow Americans. Since the lib journos are willing to pretend that spying on a presidential candidate is no big deal, and they're willing to lie about Russia-Trump collusion for years despite zero evidence, there is no level of lying too disgraceful for them. None. They will lie about anything. Their mendacity knows no bounds. Keep that in mind as you see what has really gone on here. It is disheartening as an American to see this, to be honest with you. People that I know who aren't even particularly or in any way supportive of President Trump, they see this, and the ones who are smart and who are honest say that this is going to haunt us for a long time, because we do need institutions like the Department of Justice to function not as weapons of the social justice left. We do need the establishment to be transparent and not to defend itself, not just at all costs, but as its first priority, which is what we see happening here in D.C. in the swamp. President Trump has been so clarifying in so many ways, and while I wouldn't wish any of this on any president for that matter, it is astonishing to watch the president continue to take all this incoming and give it back twice as good as he's getting it. It's pretty amazing. We got some political stories to get into today, other than the grotesque politicization of the FBI and the Department of Justice. We got a Biden story. We've got a poll about the best presidents according to Democrats and Republicans. That'll all be fun. But, what's continuing on is this impeachment ruckus. And there's even a report that I saw floated out there that maybe some Republican senators would vote to convict President Trump. Mitch McConnell, Cocaine Mitch, ain't having none of that. He's out there saying that he would be surprised. I'm glad to hear he'd be surprised if there were, in fact, 67 senators to remove the president. Play 20, please, Brandon.
I would be totally surprised if there were 67 senators to remove the president. That remains my view. However, we are obligated under the Constitution to turn to it when it comes over, and we will.
I have to say I'm not hopeful. Well, no, I'm not expecting that Republican senators are going to use the Senate trial as an opportunity to really make the Democrats pay for what they've done, because they should. That would be justice. That would be fair. That would be right. They should do everything they can to humiliate the sham put forward by Nancy Pelosi and Adam Schiff and Jerry Nadler and all the rest of them. They should try to humiliate this narrative as best they can. I worry, though, that the Senate, because it has this grandiose sense of itself as the place where the passions of the House go to be a bit cooled off, that they won't do what they really need to do. And remember, you have Pelosi running around still telling people this. And I can't imagine anyone is so incapable of sound thinking that they would believe it. But she still runs around saying that she really wishes she didn't have to impeach the president, play 18.
I wish it were not necessary. I wish the president's actions did not make it necessary. But he did, and we would be delinquent in honoring our oath of office if we did not impeach him for not honoring his oath of office.
Does anyone believe that? I mean, I really put out this. Please, if you're out there, you believe that, send me an email and let's get you to call into the show, or I'll read whatever you write. I just want to know, does anyone believe her? I mean Democrats. Does anyone believe her? She keeps saying this. It's the most absurd thing I've ever heard. But they've got to just try to dress this up, this whole impeachment nonsense. They have to make it seem like something other than what it is. It is an absolute joke, except it's unfortunately quite serious because it involves the President of the United States and institutions of government that do, unfortunately, have a lot of power. A lot of power over all of our lives. Even look, there are some out there who understand what's really at stake here. Kevin McCarthy, for example, understands this. Play 14.
You've got to understand what impeachment means. Impeachment is the removal of the highest elected person in this land. I don't care if you think Americans who support President Trump are deplorables, but you do not have the right to disqualify their vote just because you do not like President Trump.
This is what happens when you have an entire ideology that has really fallen into a stage of totalitarianism, which is the truth of the Democratic Party. They don't yet have the power to be totalitarians, but they think in the terms, they think along the lines of supposedly benevolent totalitarians. They want to control every aspect of your life, what you think, what you say, what you do, everything, because they think they know better than you. They want to control the economy. They want to control your conduct in your home, with your family, tell your kids where they can go to school. There is nothing that is beyond their purview at the federal level, mind you. They want to control all of it. They think it's going to be better for everybody. And if you stand in their way, you are an impediment to utopia. You are somebody that needs to be crushed and destroyed to encourage the others, to borrow from Voltaire. That's what we are seeing play out now. Anything is justified because the power to make the United States a perfect liberal paradise is too compelling to skip. It's too compelling to pass. And so that's why they'll even go out there. I mean, Nancy Pelosi is making a fool of herself daily. No one seems to care. Adam Schiff is a liar. No one seems to care. Jerry Nadler is a joke. Just continues on. So, team, I appeared last night on Fox News at Night with Shannon Bream, and you all know that I think Shannon's great. I was on with a liberal named Jessica Tarlov, and she's a liberal. I mean, she's believes the stuff that she says, I guess. Thinks that, I don't know, if you watch the segment, you'll see it's pretty amazing. We talked about this sheriff in Houston who had called out by name the Republican Senate, specifically Ted Cruz and also Mitch McConnell, for not passing the Violence Against Women Act that the Democrats have passed. Yeah, you had this sheriff who says, whose side are you on? This police chief ripped these two Republicans. And look, we can all sit around here and pretend that that's not a bizarre political statement for somebody to make, or an unfair political statement, because this is about a sheriff's, as a sergeant, I believe, in his Houston PD, who was killed by a male acquaintance. And this goes to the boyfriend loophole is what is getting attention here, the boyfriend loophole. And this is a talking point you'll hear a lot in the media when they decide to talk about this. Because remember, gun control is really it's not about saving lives for most liberals because they don't know any lives that it would save. It's just about the virtue signaling of, I don't like violence, and oh my gosh, those big bad gun owners in the NRA, they do. This is such a brainless and destructive position, but it's a very common one among liberals that they really think the other side doesn't care about preventing violence against women. They've convinced themselves that this is true. It's horrifying. It's untrue. But then again, liberals convince themselves of a lot of things that are completely irrational beliefs about their political opponents. They convince themselves, for example, that we don't care about the planet's future, and if the human race is extinct because of fossil fuels, well, we were getting paid off by fossil fuels or something, so we don't care about any of that. I mean, this is absurd. I mean, this is not a serious claim that could be made from one person to another, but liberals say it all the time. It's just become built into the system of the talking points and the memes and the bleating of the sheep from Animal Farm, repeating, 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. That's what they do. And go back, if you haven't in a while, go back and read Animal Farm again. It's basically just an instruction manual for how liberals conduct themselves all the time. It's very readable. Producer Brandon, you ever read it? One of the finest satires in the English language. Really, it's amazing.
Not since grade school, but I think I need to.
It's one of those things you read it in grade school and it's fine, and you get some of it, but go back and read it as an adult.
A different perspective, I'm sure.
It's a total, it totally nails the leftist mentality, which is just put us in control. The rules don't apply to us. They should apply to everybody else, though, because we're going to do this amazing stuff when we're in control. And so everybody else who has to get crushed along the way, that's too bad for them because we're going to do great things. And all the hypocrisy and all the changing of the rules and all the manipulation of standards along the way, that's all justified. That's all justified. But back to this Houston police chief, Art Acevedo, slamming McConnell over the Violence Against Women Act. The problem is that the Houston police chief, you would think he would know that state law in Texas already made the guy who shot this police sergeant in Houston, the guy was already a prohibited possessor. He had already been convicted of misdemeanor domestic violence, and in almost half of all states, that's already a prohibited possessor situation. Under the currently existing Violence Against Women Act, which really it's a whole bunch of things go into this. It funds education about domestic violence, women's shelters, hotline programs, a lot of things to help with domestic violence. So, and it's been a bipartisan issue for years and years now. Democrats refuse to just reauthorize it as is, even though they're still funding for the programs. They refuse to reauthorize the bill, which comes up every couple of years. They wanted to change it around and add, I think, LGBTQ and specific tribal authority protections. And then I think they try to work some other stuff in there. And it's just turned into this, Democrats are grandstanding, Republicans don't want to protect people from gun violence because of the NRA. Suggesting that the NRA doesn't care about gun violence. Meanwhile, how many NRA members are ever responsible for any form of gun violence versus the general population? Go check out that statistic. And all of a sudden, the NRA is bloodthirsty killers. It evaporates as a talking point. But I just thought it was interesting. I called out that Acevedo. Here we have an incident where the guy who got the gun it was already illegal for him to purchase a gun. We don't know how he got it necessarily. He might have had it after. By the way, you're supposed to turn in your firearm if you are convicted of a domestic, but maybe he just didn't turn it in. So it's already illegal for him to have the gun. And this sheriff down in Houston is calling out Mitch McConnell in Kentucky for not doing what the Democrats say he must do in a piece of national legislation that would have done nothing to stop this incident. Zero. It's already illegal. Already illegal. We're going to make it even. It's illegal to kill somebody for one, obviously, but it's also illegal for him to even have the firearm in the first place. So he got an illegal gun. So now you're going to blame Mitch McConnell for not having another law that would make it illegal again? It doesn't make any sense. But, my counterpart last night at Fox, who's a liberal, we have to stop gun violence. Okay. How? Oh, national. We need to nationalize background checks so that we have a registry, or we need to. There's always, and no, this wouldn't stop anything. We live in a country, we live in a world where there are bad people who do violent things. And we live in a country where we have a lot of firearms. There are other countries where they have a lot of firearms too, by the way, And this is, I know, see, where we just keep getting sucked into the same discussion. But the part of this that gets me so annoyed, New York, that law that I told you about where you can't transport your gun out, and the New York lawyers for this, when pressed by the Supreme Court, admitted that they don't really know what the extent of the law is and that it wouldn't save anybody anything. They have that law because New York City is a Democrat stronghold, and Democrats ideologically, emotionally, are opposed to legal gun ownership. And they don't like people who want to own guns legally. Those people are generally Republican, generally the other, so they want to find a way to stick a thumb in their eye, and that's what the law was about. No person thought the law was going to save anyone anything. So why have it in the books? Just to harass, just to annoy, just make life a little bit harder for legal gun owners in New York City. Just a little bit. Really. You see this not just in New York, this is true in a lot of other places as well. They have laws in the books that no serious person thinks are going to save any lives. But they know that it's going to annoy people who own guns, and if it annoys people who own guns, well, that in and of itself then is, of course, that's a worthwhile endeavor. Something that we should seek to impose on people. It's very, very frustrating to see this. And it's frustrating to have a gun control conversation with shrill, emotional libs because they just want to talk about how they want to save lives and we don't, and that's idiocy. And, of course, libs also know nothing about guns or gun laws, too, and unfortunately that was a bit the case last night that I was dealing with. I was dealing with a counterpart on the other side in terms of a conversation over guns. She just doesn't know anything about gun laws or guns. So the point is, a liberal sits there and says, you don't care about dead kids from gun violence. And I sit there and say, well, let's talk about the laws and what we can do about this. I mean, I didn't hurt anybody. I don't know, what are we having an adult policy conversation? Are we having you're bad, you're Republicans, you like guns? This is what liberals do all the time. That's the liberal approach. Because it's now a cultural issue. It's much more pushed by politicians as a way to separate out left and right, as a way to separate out people who believe in the supremacy of the state versus those who believe in individual liberty, the right to defend oneself, and the right to bear arms. The right to bear arms, if necessary, against the state. Yeah, that's why we have it, as a defense against tyranny. Liberals still think that that's so crazy. Look back in history. Very sophisticated, advanced, wealthy societies all of a sudden go tyrannical. When the population has no firearms, guess what? Things go a lot worse. Of course, the left rejects all of this. And they reject any good faith effort from conservatives to work with them on trying to add to the mountain of laws already in the books about guns. There's all kinds of laws about where you can take your gun, what kind of guns you can own, prohibited possessor, background checks, all these things. We already have all these laws. More laws, more laws, more laws, more laws. No! Endless regulation is not good for business. Endless regulation is not good for freedom. These are straightforward propositions that the left does not either understand or care to understand. I'm not really sure necessarily which one it is. Speaking of guns and law enforcement, a really bloody shootout yesterday in Jersey City, which is just across the river from Manhattan, where I'm doing this show right now. I can actually see Jersey City from my bedroom window. And you had one detective and 3 civilians killed during a shootout and standoff at a Jersey City kosher market on Tuesday. This was a story that you could tell they were ready to make this a big national headline, and then it sort of dropped out of the headlines. It was mentioned last night briefly when I was on Fox, and then today you can see a lot of other news organizations are not picking up on this one in the way that they would if the circumstances were different, and I think we have some idea as to why. It was an attack on a kosher market, a Jewish-owned deli, essentially, delicatessen in Jersey City. And the people and the mayor has already said that he believed that there was that this delicatessen was targeted. And I was wondering, well, what do we mean by targeted? I mean, if they're talking about targeting them because they are Jewish, now we're in hate crime / perhaps terrorism territory, depending on that motivation and what the background situation was. And it turns out that the two people engaged in the shooting have ties to a group known as the Black Hebrew Israelites. Now, why is the media so much less interested all of a sudden in this story? Well, because this looks to be at this point, with the information that's come in, an anti-Semitic hate crime, a murderous anti-Semitic hate crime committed by an African-American male, African-American female. So two black assailants who are tied to this group or have been tied to this group in the past, the Black Hebrew Israelites. And so there won't be a teachable moment here about white nationalism, about how Trump is creating all this anti-Semitism. There won't be any of that at all. They'll just say that this was a very tragic incident. Law enforcement responded, and maybe there'll be some discussion about guns because I believe that one of the Hebrew Israelites had a long gun in this market, and there was this long standoff with law enforcement. But because it wasn't a situation involving the white nationalists that we always hear about from the media, this will not be a major news story for very long at all, and we all know that. Perhaps also worth pointing out that the Black Hebrew Israelites are the group that many of you may have seen back during the Covington Kids fiasco. Remember the Covington Kids that were reported on by a lot of major news outlets for, smirking, staring at just a wonderful Native American leader and spiritual healer or whatever they were saying this guy was. And then it turned out that there were kids on a school trip and a bunch of adults were yelling racist epithets at them and antagonizing them. And that Native American activist guy went up in their faces, banging a drum in their faces because some of them were wearing MAGA hats. And you're not allowed to do that, it seems, according to a lot of left-wing adults. Even if you're kids, not allowed to do that. And they reported on the Covington Kids in a way that was reckless. And now there's a major lawsuit underway. And, I'm all for it. I see my friend Dan Bongino is suing the Daily Beast. God bless him, Dan. I hope you take him to the cleaners. I hope you own the Daily Beast in a year. Call it the Bongino Beast. I hope it's yours. That's what should happen. That should be a good paper. Bongino Beast. Dan's kind of a big guy. It looked like maybe he's like selling some kind of a supplement for the gun show. You know what I mean? But nonetheless, I'm happy. I think Dan's doing the right move there. The Covington Kids are suing. I believe they're suing a whole bunch of different publications for the fake news that was spread about them. Devin Nunes, I think, is also suing CNN for lying about him. I mean, it's time to start. Let's test out some of these defamation laws. Let's test out these libel laws. Let's see what really works here and what doesn't. Because these organizations need to be held to account for what they do. But I can just tell you right now, you're not going to see very much about a black male assailant here tied to the Black Hebrew Israelites murdering a couple of Jewish people in a delicatessen. He left a note, apparently, as well. And, I mean, here, let me give you... Who are the Jersey City shootout suspects? Follower of the Black Hebrew Israelite movement, a group who believes the members are descendants of the ancient Israelites. There was a note with religious writings in the U-Haul he and Graham allegedly drove to the scene, but a motive, including any alleged nexus to hate or terror, remains under active investigation, so they haven't really found that yet. But they do think they went right to this Jewish delicatessen. Law enforcement had no immediate details on Graham, but a neighbor tells News 4 she lived near him, and he turned into a dark person after he met a woman who was a former health aide, and claims Graham was coerced into a militant religion he could not identify, chanting and reading of the New Testament translated into evil, and could hear this from her home. It sounds like radicalization along the lines of what you'd expect from the black Hebrew Israelites, who do a little bit of reading from parts of the Bible, and then they chant epithets at people. I mean, I've seen them on the streets. They call white people the devil. I mean, this is the group, and they also are anti-Semitic, but because the target doesn't fit, because this person can't be blamed on Trump, it's just not. There'll be no national conversation had about this. No one's going to come together and say, oh, we really need to focus on this. Let's have a whole bunch of panels on CNN with 10 people at a time, all talking about how, Trump is basically responsible for the shootout in Jersey City. They're not going to do that. And this should surprise no one, because media is full of a bunch of propagandistic hacks who have no decency or ethics whatsoever. Not everybody, but most of them.